You want to hand me that? Thank you. All right. You can call your next witness. The podium here and be sworn in by my clerk.
Can you spell your name for the record?
Scott, S-C-O-T-T, Cowden, C-A-W.
Please raise your right hand. Solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth will help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, you're going to come up this little ramp, have a seat right here.
Sir, would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Scott Cowden,
And where do you work?
Chandler Fire Department.
How long have you worked there?
Almost 26 years.
And talk to you a little bit about what firefighters do. Do you just respond to fires, or are you also responsible for something else?
No, the majority of our job is going to be EMS medical calls.
What kind of training do you have to work as a firefighter and deal with medical calls?
When you're hired, you're going to go through an academy that will certify you as a state firefighter. Typically, you're going to already be certified as an EMT. And then during the course of your career, I went to paramedic school and graduated from that in probably 2007.
Can you tell us what the difference is between a paramedic and an EMT?
EMT would just be kind of the more basic kind of entry level position. Paramedic is more advanced, so you have more advanced training. There's more advanced skills that you could perform. Some of our equipment would only be able to be used and utilized and performed by a paramedic.
As both a EMT or a paramedic, are you trained to perform CPR?
Yes.
And can you tell us, have you ever been a CPR instructor yourself?
Yes, I was a CPR instructor for probably over 12 years.
Was that for other firefighters?
I was certified through American Heart Association, a contract employee with Dignity Health. They have a variety of different classes that could be for just the lay rescuer, lay person that wants to know how to do CPR. They have classes that might be for certain businesses that want their employees. And then there's healthcare provider classes that it could be firefighters, nurses that are attending to be recertified. Every 2 years, you have to have that certification recertified.
Can you tell us what CPR is?
It stands for cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So you're kind of acting as the heart. The heart has stopped beating, so no blood is flowing through the body. You're doing chest compressions on the chest, and you're pumping and pushing that blood to the body.
When would you give CPR to a person?
If they don't have a pulse. You confirm that just by checking for a pulse, and you don't feel that. The heart isn't beating, and you would need to start chest compressions.
What is the point of that, of doing those chest compressions? You said moving the blood through the body. Why?
You're trying to, give them a chance, increase their chance of survival. I don't know what maybe the latest numbers and statistics might say, but in the past I've seen it say that if somebody's starts CPR within the first few minutes, it can double or triple their chances of surviving. When
you are called to a scene, are you guys being given updates by the 911 operator to your dispatch so you know what to expect?
Yeah, so you get dispatched and you already have an idea of the type of call, and then en route we call it PTI, and that will come across the computer screen. And so now you have more information of what you're kind of walking into, so you can kind of game plan it a little bit more.
If somebody calls 911 and doesn't know how to do CPR, what happens?
My understanding is that 911 would talk them through that and give them instructions of what to do.
Okay. When you are giving CPR, you talked about chest compressions. Can you talk to us about, is there any physical identification that you might observe on a person who has had CPR chest compressions?
That I might see.
After a person has been given chest compressions?
Yes. So you need to perform it in the right location. So it's the lower half of the sternum or breastbone. To kind of find that, it's more helpful if you can see the skin, maybe lift up the shirt. So that's typically something we're going to want to do. If CPR has been done and it's been done effectively enough, you can see almost like a depression or an impression that is left there on the skin, because you need to do it forceful enough and deep enough that you're actually compressing the heart to push the blood.
So you said you might see a depression. Does that not just pop right back out when you stop?
No, you'll still see it. You'll see it like if you stop CPR during the call for whatever reason that it might be appropriate, and then you go back to resuming CPR, you'll see where your hands were. That area can be vulnerable to breaking. Ribs can break during CPR, so there's typically depression in the chest.
Do you ever actually hear anything when you are giving someone chest compressions?
I for sure feel it. I don't know if it's audible enough to hear it, especially with maybe the rest of the commotion that's going on, but you definitely feel that crunch or that crack. I kind of compare it to like if you're cracking your knuckles in your hands or something, your fingers. It kind of feels like something like that, but more extreme, I guess.
And this is something that you have felt multiple times in doing CPR?
Yes, and teaching CPR, you want to forewarn people of that too, that to kind of expect that and not necessarily kind of be alarmed. You don't want them to think they've caused more harm necessarily.
Does that crack or crunch occur each time you restart CPR in the same patient?
No, it's typically just the first couple of times.
Have you previously performed CPR on a person who was shot?
I'm sure I probably have.
When you are performing CPR on a person that's shot, have you ever seen that cause more blood to come out if there are gunshot wounds?
Yes, I've been on some scenes where, it's been a little more bloody, so to speak. You have to be cautious of where you're stepping, or if you're kneeling down by the patient's side to perform the CPR, you're trying to be careful of that.
I want to bring you to July 11th of 2019, a call to 5531 South Four Peaks Place. Do you recall this incident?
Yes.
Do you still have some independent memory of this?
Yes.
Was it the fact that the police interviewed you also make this a more memorable scene?
Yes.
Do you recall when you first got to the scene, did you just drive right up, or how did you guys approach the scene?
Call types like this, we're going to stage and wait for PD to clear the scene so it's safe to enter. So you're going to get into in this particular case, you're going to be in the neighborhood, but you're going to be around the corner, around the block, a street away, whatever kind of might make the most sense based on where we're coming from.
Okay. How many people are on a fire engine?
In the city of Chandler, we typically have at least 4 on any of our fire engines and fire ladders.
And what was your role?
So you'll have a captain who's up front. That's the person that's in charge. I'm a fire engineer specifically, so I drive the fire apparatus. And then we'll have 2 firefighters in the back seat.
Do you recall in this case about how far away you were staged?
I mean, from a time standpoint, we might have been 30 seconds away.
Who were the other people on your team that day,
By names,
if you recall?
okay, Captain Keller, firefighters Kaczynski, and firefighter Fife.
When you arrive at a scene like this, you told us that there's a captain, you're the driver. Does everyone sort of have a job, or how does that work when you first get there?
You typically may kind of talk about roles and what might happen. Also, like in this particular case, this was our first call of the day. So all of our calls, we're going to do some documentation and chart it. And so we typically start with, the captain will start the first call of the day. So that meant Captain Keller was going to be charting it. So that would leave the other 3 of us to do the evaluation, assessment, and patient contact and skills.
So when you drove up to the scene, what did you see?
I remember us having to make a turn, and a couple of officers I feel like were already there, kind of navigate their cars, position right in front of the house. Saw at least one officer outside, saw a citizen, I feel like probably in the driveway somewhere with that officer. And then we just kind of proceeded out of the apparatus.
When you guys entered the house, you said that Captain Keller was going to be charting. So does that mean he wouldn't be touching the patient?
More than likely not, unless we needed additional help. I mean, he possibly could have been the first one in also. The way we were parked, that passenger side of the fire apparatus was the closest to the front door. He might have been in first, because I'm going to be on the other side. The 2 firefighters are getting out and going to the back compartment of the truck to get the equipment. So he may have walked up and possibly checked a pulse or something like that first, but he didn't. I don't feel like he did anything else other than that, if that.
Okay. You told us that as you're going there, you're receiving information about the patient, correct?
Correct.
In this case, had you received any information about whether or not he was receiving CPR?
Yes, I recall we had that info 2 ways. We had it with the PTI on our computer screen, which would be coming from our fire department dispatch. And then we have the ability to also listen on the radio to the PD channels. And so we can hear communication between the officers that are getting on scene and then the PD dispatch. And they also communicated that at some point in time.
When you entered the house, was there an officer already inside?
I believe there was an officer inside with Captain Keller.
And did you observe anyone giving the patient CPR?
No.
Can you tell us what you saw when you first entered the house?
You walked in the front door, just kind of a little entryway, and it kind of, I feel like it stepped down into maybe a formal kind of family room or something, but it was empty with no furniture anywhere in the room. That jumped out at first because it makes it easier. Like sometimes we're on scenes where a patient could be between a bed and a closet and you got to move them somewhere. So those thoughts are already kind of in your mind that you may have to move a patient just to have better access, and that was not a challenge here.
Did you notice any blood on the scene?
Not until I saw it on the patient's chest, but I didn't see it in the room. It wasn't something that I was going to need to avoid kneeling in to do CPR. avoid standing in, walking around. There's 4 of us. We probably had at least 4 boxes of equipment in there. So we didn't have to worry about where we placed this stuff in terms of blood.
Have you been to scenes where there's a large pool of blood around the patient that you're trying to not step in, kneel in, get in?
Yes.
You told us that you saw blood on the patient. Do you recall seeing any blood pooling in his chest, neck area?
I don't recall it pooling. He still had clothes on, a shirt on, and so it had been absorbing some blood.
I'm going to show you an admitted exhibit number 3. Do you recall ever seeing this pooling of blood around his neck there?
I don't recall that.
Okay. When you first saw the patient, what was your first impression?
That he's lying there unresponsive. You're not seeing any signs of life. You don't see somebody that's maybe moaning from an injury, moving, no spontaneous breathing. What was your question again?
Just your first impressions of him as you are walking in and you're looking at him and assessing him.
Yeah, I guess that would be sufficient for my answer.
Did you think that he could be deceased?
It's definitely was a possibility. There was no, like I said, no obvious signs of life.
When you got into the room, did someone begin performing CPR on him?
So when I got to Charles' side, I would have performed a more detailed assessment, so to speak, rather than what I was seeing visually. So you're checking for responsiveness. You can move the patient. You're going to check for a pulse. Now you're closer to the chest. You're looking for breathing, seeing if you see the chest rise and fall. And we would call him unresponsive and pulseless and apneic. Apneic meaning not breathing. And then I would have started CPR.
So he wasn't breathing, he had no pulse, he wasn't moving, there were no signs of life.
Correct.
You told us that you had received information that someone had been doing CPR prior to your arrival, correct?
Correct.
Did that impact your view of the patient and your decision-making on what you should do next when you see this patient that is lifeless?
I mean, it makes you think that there's increased likelihood that of survival possibly, until we can, starting CPR is still appropriate to do, and then we can utilize some of our rest of our equipment. We can put an EKG machine on. We can actually see what the heart is doing. We can look at the rhythm. We wouldn't want to call a patient before, taking some additional steps.
Okay. Who performed CPR?
I did.
And I'll put up Exhibit 4 here. Do you recognize who these people are?
Yes.
And who are they?
So standing to the left is Captain Keller. He's documenting. Standing to the right is firefighter Kaczynski. And then kneeling down back towards us is myself. And then kneeling down where you're pointing is firefighter Fife.
When you first began performing CPR, can you tell us what you felt?
So At first, I didn't see a depression that would typically be left from somebody else previously doing compressions. So I thought that was odd considering the information we had en route. I started doing compressions. I felt that initial crack and crunch for probably the first couple of compressions that, again, you would typically feel when you're first starting compressions and if you're going hard enough and deep enough.
How long did you do CPR before you evaluated and utilized any other means to see if he might still be alive, savable?
If I had to estimate, I think I was probably doing CPR, chest compressions for at least a minute. It probably took them at least 30 seconds to a minute to maybe get in to the house where I was after I entered. They've got to set down that equipment and get some of that out. So I feel like at least a minute is a fair assessment.
What happened next? Is there some way to check his heart to see if there's
Right.
activity, or what do you do?
Yes, so I was doing chest compressions. I remember mentioning, because there's bullet holes going through them, so I remember mentioning to firefighter Kaczynski when she went to cut the shirt to not cut through a bullet hole. So she kind of went along the side. That's exposing the chest, so that way then we can put our heart monitor and perform an EKG on Charles to kind of see what his rhythm is doing. A person can typically still do chest compressions while they're doing that, and they can kind of work around you. But at some point in time, you're going to have to stop. That way, you can just look at what the machine is showing you and telling you.
Was there any heart activity when you put on those EKG?
No, it was what we would call asystole, and it's just a flat line on the screen. There's no electrical activity of the heart.
At some point, you said you saw gunshot wounds. Do you recall how many you saw in the front there?
I saw 2.
Do you ever look to see if there's exit wounds?
We did roll him. I seem to recall and remember that we rolled him my way. I feel like the other 2 firefighters were then on that other side. Firefighter Kaczynski, who's the one that is standing up, I feel like she had a better view of what those looked like since he was rolled my way. But I remember her commenting that there was 2 wounds on that backside of the patient.
So when you say he was rolled towards you, he's rolled towards this mirror over here?
Correct.
Okay. When you had stopped doing the CPR to roll him and he goes back, did you notice the depression in his chest now?
After I resumed CPR, yes. It makes it kind of easier to find your landmark, so it's something that you typically look for.
So it was not there when you first started CPR,
Correct.
but it was after you had performed it.
Correct.
Do you wear gloves when you do this?
Yes.
Did you have blood on your gloves after you were doing CPR?
Yes.
You told us that when you first arrived, there was not much concern for having to navigate around blood that might be pooling around the victim, correct?
Correct.
After you had been doing CPR, was there more blood now around the patient?
There was definitely more on his chest. More was coming out of the wounds, specifically the one on the chest, from what I recall. The shirt isn't necessarily there to absorb it anymore. We've removed it. I can't recall necessarily on the ground, like where I might have been kneeling, but
When you first arrived, did you see any blood exiting the abdomen wound?
I did not.
As you were at this scene, you guys did the EKG. There was no heart activity. What do you do after that?
At some point in time, we just kind of have to look at patient viability, and we're just looking at the facts and how he's kind of presenting. and we're considering time that we've already been on scene, time, staging, responding, all of that. And we ultimately, we do have offlines that we follow for different types of medical calls, and we felt that he fell into that category of not being viable and that we could call him on scene.
Now, you talked about you were not staged very far away, correct?
Correct.
Were you staged very long before you pulled up?
I felt like we might have been there for at least a couple of minutes.
Okay. When the patient was rolled, did anyone notice anything about, or did you notice anything about his skin that made you also question perhaps how long it had been since he had been shot?
Yes, it was pointed out because I didn't have a good view of that backside, the skin color, some modeling. There's changes in the skin color that are starting to occur from, blood hasn't been circulating, maybe been circulating as effectively as compared to when a heart is beating. You've got 2 injuries to the thoracic torso of the body, so to speak, the chest and abdomen. Those are going to hit internal organs and cause internal bleeding. And so that blood is starting to kind of what we would call dependent lividity, and it's just gravity. It's just kind of starting to go towards the backside, and the color changes are occurring.
So as the heart stops, the blood starts to just pool.
Yes, it's just stagnant, not being moved, and then those injuries inside, he's going to be bleeding internally.
And so some of that pooling causes color changes to the skin?
Yes.
That were observed.
Yes.
Was there anything about this victim, about Charles, that made you think that CPR may not have been performed on him prior to you arriving?
It was just simply the fact that what I saw on the chest when I first looked at it before I started CPR, and then what I felt during my first couple of chest compressions.
After you guys rolled him, saw the modeling and the lividity, was any further CPR performed?
From what I recall, yes.
Okay. When did you call this then?
Say that again?
When did you call it? When did you stop performing CPR?
So I don't remember with 100% certainty if I feel like, from what I recall, I'm performing chest compressions, the shirt's going to be cut off, we're exposing the patient, rolling, looking for more wounds and injuries, confirming what we see on the back, pointing that out to Captain Keller so he can document it, rolling back down, resuming CPR, monitors going on, stopping again to look at what the monitor's saying, resuming again to then have a brief discussion based on, okay, what we found, what are we thinking, where does he kind of fall?
Ultimately, did you guys terminate any treatment at about 8:48 a.m.?
If that's what's on the documentation, I would agree with that. I know we responded in the morning. It was our shift starts at 8 a.m. This was our first call. I don't remember if you said earlier what time we were dispatched or not, or just established the date.
If my paralegal could approach with the charting, would looking at the charting help you refresh your recollection as to when you guys ended
Sure.
any life-saving means?
So it looks like our dispatch is 8:37. Looks like we might have made patient contact at 8:45. the dispatch screen that will have like times of responding and things like that. Might have an appropriate time on it also that I'm not seeing right here though, but I'm still looking. So I see our first monitored rhythm as the asystole, like I said, that date time, I see a time of 8:48. So that might have been when we called him. I can see the obvious signs of death that Captain Keller used as the reason for discontinuing ROSC, return of spontaneous circulation, no. So that would probably be the appropriate time.
After, well, let me say, so does it seem about right that you were with this patient for maybe 3 or so minutes? Actively working?
Actively working, I think probably close to 5 minutes.
Okay. And once he's called, what do you do at the scene? What do you do with all your equipment?
So once he's called, it's kind of a PD scene now. So we're gonna leave the body. We're gonna gather up what we can, our equipment. Sometimes there's some stuff we might need to leave behind that's necessary to leave on the patient. But
So like the EKG monitors that are stuck on him, you leave those on him?
yeah, we can disconnect those exactly and bring the cables with us.
Okay. When you told us when you arrived that you noticed a individual with a police officer near the driveway.
Correct.
Did you see that same person still outside when you exited?
Yes.
Did you notice any bleeding or obvious injuries to that person?
No.
Did you make an assumption as to who that was?
Yes, our PTI en route said brother or brother-in-law shot brother, so performing CPR, so you're kind of assuming it's that person.
Okay. In terms of his size, is he someone that, you talked about people may not be able to always be strong enough or able to perform CPR in a way to cause the depression or that crunching sound, for lack of a better term. In your experience, what type of people are we talking about for that, where you wouldn't be surprised that you may not have seen that depression or the crunching?
It's typically going to be maybe an elderly population, somebody that's not as big, not as strong, that might not be able to perform chest compressions hard enough and deep enough. Sometimes if a patient is in a bed, so mattress has give to it, compressions won't be as effective. You want to get him to the floor. Obviously, he was already on the floor, so that aids chest compressions.
Was there anything about this male that you saw when you observed him entering or exiting that made you believe that he had been injured?
No.
Based upon your training and experience and what you observed and did in this case, would you agree that the victim, Charles Vallow, was dead before you entered the house?
Yes.
Based upon your training and experience and what you observed and did in this case, would you agree that it was highly unlikely that anyone had performed CPR on Charles Vallow prior to you doing that?
Yes.
I have no other questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross.
You want me to go now, or it's 4:30? I didn't know if you wanted
How long do you anticipate your cross-examination?
to take a while, Your Honor.
All right, we'll break for the evening then. We'll need you back here tomorrow morning at 10:30.
10:30?
Yes. All right, we'll release the jury at this time for the evening. We'll resume tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Please remember the admonition.
All rise for the jury.
what?
Walked into the house, proceeded forward, saw a patient on the floor to the right, proceeded to the patient to start an assessment and evaluation.
And then Captain Keller had already come in.
I'm pretty confident, yes, he would have been quicker getting off the truck and inside.
And so you did your assessment, and then what?
My assessment revealed that he was unresponsive, no pulse, no breathing, so I would have started CPR, started chest compressions.
Did you do that with his shirt on?
I would have lifted that out of the way so I could find the proper landmarks.
So you had said that you saw that there was, let's see, 2 gunshot wounds. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you saw that through the shirt? Or how did you assess that when you first entered? That's my question.
Once I'm doing CPR, I can see 2 bullet holes in the shirt. I can see that on the chest and on the abdomen. I can see the wounds as I'm looking at the chest and doing chest compressions.
Okay. And then he had on what color shirt?
I wouldn't have recalled other than, I guess, the video yesterday. I think it was a dark colored shirt I think we saw on the screen.
And so you had talked yesterday about the blood being more blood on chest, not pooled around your knees, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
And so with the dark shirt, was it hard to see the blood? I'm kind of trying to see what you saw when you entered.
I remember seeing blood on the chest. It wasn't, I remember not seeing blood on the abdomen.
And there were holes in the shirt, 2 holes in the front side?
I would, best of my recall, yes.
Okay. And when did you cut off the shirt, and how does that procedure work?
I continued doing CPR, chest compressions. One of my other colleagues would have cut that off. And knowing that the shirt maybe is potentially evidence, that's why I said to her, don't cut through where the holes are. So she could have cut down the side instead of on the top of the body.
And do you use like a special scissors or something for that?
Yeah, we have some trauma shears in our equipment.
Okay. And who was that? Was that Phelps or?
I believe that was firefighter Kaczynski.
Okay. Kaczynski, that's one I didn't have. So who all was sitting there with you that was on scene at that time?
Firefighter Fife would have been there. Mm-hmm. Firefighter Kaczynski, the 3 of us, kind of like we saw in the video or I get the picture yesterday. All 3 of us around the patient, while Captain Keller was standing back a little bit, like you saw in the picture.
Okay. You said that you had been a CPR instructor for 12 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And was that for the last 12 years or 12 years ago?
Approximate dates 2004 to 2016, let's say.
Okay. And so have you taught people who have never done CPR before?
Have I taught those? Yes.
Right. And not just like people renewing their certification, but both?
Correct.
Okay. How many people would you say that you've taught that have never done CPR before?
Never done CPR. It's probably in the hundreds over that long of doing that.
So you'd be familiar with how a first-timer would react?
Yeah, you try to forewarn them what to expect.
Okay. So these first-timers, they have to be taught the appropriate place to place their hands. Would that be fair?
That is part of the course, yes.
And so do you show them, or do you just tell them in class where to put their hands?
It's a video-based system through American Heart. There's a curriculum that we would have been following.
Okay. So if you could only tell them, like over the phone, that might be difficult for them to know the correct placement of their hands if they've never done it before.
I guess it depends on the instructions that the dispatcher gave. Ultimately, if I was telling somebody over the phone, you want to put your hands on their chest, on the lower part of the chest. It's that kind of simple, so to speak.
Okay. But without the video, if you were teaching a class and you didn't have the video, it might be difficult, right? For a bunch of first timers?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled. You can answer.
Does me answer? Oh, okay. Sorry. Can you repeat the question then?
Yeah, so it might be difficult. If you didn't have the video, it might be difficult, you know, for a bunch of first timers to know exactly what to do if you just had to tell them middle of the chest, lower chest.
I mean, you could obviously show on a person. You could show on yourself.
If you couldn't show them and you could only tell them, could it be difficult?
I suppose it's possible depending on the person.
Okay, that's fair. So do you think that your CPR class would be fairly successful if you had no visuals?
Objection, relevance, speculation.
Next question.
I got it, Your Honor. So if a person had never done it before and was just told how to do it, is it possible that they might not be acquainted with where to put their hands?
It's possible.
And it would also be possible that they might not do it properly.
That could be possible too.
And right now, when you're teaching CPR, and I didn't say you are teaching right now, but if you're teaching a class, are they just doing percussions now? There's no breathing in the mouth, is that correct?
It's going to depend on the level of the class. As far as the lay rescuer, people that have never done it before that just want to have the training, it's evolved and we're teaching compression only. That is a form of CPR now also, just doing chest compressions.
And how long do you teach to do that for? How long of a period before you take a rest? Or
Well, it varies depending on if the patient is an adult or a child. There are different guidelines that American Heart offers. So in those courses, they're getting to learn information for adults and children and infants also.
Correct, right. So for an adult, how long, like 30, 100, 150? It's been a while, so just wondering.
With an adult, they're also taught they need to call for help right away also. So that's a factor. Are they alone? Is somebody else able to call? Can they call, put the phone on speaker, start, while talking to 911? And then they would just keep going until help arrives.
So there's no timing, like you take a 10-second break, you just do compressions?
Not for that type of level of CPR, there wasn't.
Okay. So it's helpful if you had someone there that you could take turns, like I do 100 and then you do 100, because it's kind of exhausting, right?
Objection, compound question, relevance.
I'll sustain as to compound question. You can re-ask the question ask it in a different way. Go ahead.
So how long did you administer the CPR before you did the flip over? How long do you think that was?
Before we rolled him to look at the back, is that what you're...
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
I would estimate maybe up to a minute.
Okay. And then were you counting compressions? Is that what you were doing during that time, or do you not count? You just do it for a certain amount of time?
I don't recall if I was counting. I mean, I was doing the chest compressions while waiting for the rest of the team to arrive and for us to continue assessing, see if we're going to continue to work the patient and utilize more equipment.
And there were 3 of you there?
4 total, but 3 by the patient.
Okay. And then you could take turns, right? Like trade off if you needed to?
If we needed to, yes.
So that'd be a lot easier than when you're just there by yourself. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know how long How long after the rolling over did you started doing compressions again? Is that correct?
Yes.
That's what I had.
Yes, I believe so.
And how long did you do that for?
I would estimate maybe upwards of another minute
So maybe 2 minutes total?
during that sequence, yes.
And was there another sequence?
At some point, we would have stopped doing chest compressions so we could evaluate the heart rhythm. That's on the heart monitor.
With the heart
And you
monitor?
can't be doing compressions to evaluate that.
Okay. And then you didn't continue compressions after the heart monitor at all?
From what I recall, I resumed again in brief discussion as far as what direction we were going to go.
And what were the results of the heart monitor?
There was no electrical activity.
And how long was the heart monitor applied compared to when you started the first compressions?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Maybe you can reword it or...
Sure. How far into your treatment, I should say, did you guys stop and do the heart monitor?
I would estimate that the monitor probably was on within 2 minutes of making patient contact.
Okay. And how long does that take?
To do what? To put it on?
Well, yeah, to put it on, get a reading, and decide what you're going to do next.
It could take, you got to turn it on, open up a compartment to get the pads out of that compartment. You've got to open that packaging to be able to apply it to the patient's chest area. If the chest is wet, which there's some blood, you need to dry that so it's going to adhere more properly, read more properly. So you could be looking at 30 seconds to a minute possibly of working through that.
Okay. And did you have to do that in this case, is remove blood to stick them on?
I would assume so, but I was doing chest compressions, so that would have been one of the other two firefighters kind of working through that.
Okay. So I understand correctly, you said when you rolled him over, did you cut the shirt in the back also to see the exit wounds? Is that?
No, we only had to cut the shirt one time. That was when he was still laying on his back. You cut it down the side, and that opens it up to where then you can remove it from the body, pull it off.
So you did pull it off completely at some point?
More than likely, I would say yes. That's typically what we would do.
Okay. But you don't remember if you did that in this case?
I know that I didn't do that because I was doing chest compressions, so I would assume one of my colleagues did that completely. That's typically what we do.
Okay. And so you're back to doing the compressions for the third time, and then you stopped that at some point. Was there another procedure after that?
No, at that point in time is when we would have called the patient.
And who announces that?
Ultimately, I remember our captain, since he's in charge of the crew, would be considered the lead medic. He has the most experience. He's also charting the call, kind of running it, kind of made that final decision.
And that would be Captain Keller? I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then he did call it at, do you know what time?
It would have, I don't have it memorized, no. It would have been like in the charting that he was doing.
And who documents that?
He would
that
have
time?
documented
He would have
that.
done it? Okay. In preparation for your testimony here today, did you review the 911 call at all?
No, not in preparation for today. Not the actual audio, no.
No.
No, not today, not for this.
What did you review for today?
I was able to look at the incident times were dispatched by Phoenix Fire Department. I was able to look at the paper documentation, I was able to see my testimony from Idaho. I was able to see my testimony with Chandler PD when they came to the fire station a couple of weeks after this incident.
And what paper documentation did you actually take a look at?
It would have been the chart that Captain Keller documented.
And what does that chart consist of?
There would be scene times, date, time, address, patient information, name, address, maybe medical history, things that we, a narrative of what we discovered, what we've done, treatments that we've done. The heart rhythm from the monitor gets attached to it.
So that would all be in Captain Keller's report?
Correct.
And you did take a look at that in preparation for today?
Yes.
And did you write a report regarding this incident?
No.
You don't have to document anything?
Just one person documents the call.
So for all of the people that were there from fire?
Correct.
Okay. So that's the total report, is you just give your input to him and he puts it into the report?
Correct.
And that's the same for the other two firefighters that were along with you?
That's correct.
Okay. So they don't have their own individual reports as well?
No.
Okay. And what time were you dismissed from the scene?
We probably only remained an additional 5 to 10 minutes. The chart would have that time. I don't necessarily have it by memory.
So how long were you at the scene total?
If I had to estimate without looking at it, I would say approximately 20, 25 minutes.
Okay. And then you were like the driver of the truck, right? Was that your responsibility? So you drove in and then did you drive out as well?
Correct.
Okay. So if you guys arrived around 8:41 or something like that, then you left around 25 minutes later? Would that be accurate?
I guess when I was giving that estimate of the 2025, I was even including our dispatch time from the time we're dispatched driving to the scene. So if you're wanting to know actual on scene time, it might be closer. Instead of the 20 to 25, it might be more of a closer to 20 solid.
20 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. And is that typical for a call?
It can vary depending on the calls.
Okay. So what other things did you do in that 20 minutes besides administer to the patient?
So I'm including in that time while we're staged around the corner, waiting for PD to arrive, then for PD to clear the scene, for us to drive to the scene. There's the time with the patient, and then there's going to be the cleanup afterwards. Removing our equipment, going outside. Maybe the equipment needs to be cleaned, restocked, ready for another call. So when we drive away, we're ready to respond to another emergency and then drive away.
Okay. So when you were done with the patient and you were going through that procedure of cleaning, were you in the house or did you exit the house?
We'll remove all of our stuff and we'll go outside, typically to the front bumper of the fire truck.
And then what do you do?
We have cleaning chemicals on the truck that we could get out to, clean our equipment up to reuse it. We've got cabinet with restock to be able to restock anything that might need to be. So we'll take care of those things to be ready to respond to another call.
Okay. And while you were out front, did you see Alex on the curb?
I did see somebody on the curb or I don't remember if he was on the curb or standing, but I remember seeing somebody with an officer or officers. I don't recall how many people might have been together.
Okay. And did you converse with those officers at all during that time?
I don't believe so. I don't really remember conversing with any officers on scene. That would have been more Captain Keller, charting, documenting, kind of getting information from them. He would be able to answer that question.
Okay. So did you, was anybody in firefighting on your team, the four of you that were there, was anyone asked to take a look at Alex?
We were not.
Let's see. Have you spoken to the media about this case?
I'm going to object. Relevance?
What's the relevance?
What is the relevance, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Just to know how many times he's given testimony?
Your Honor, I'm
All right,
going
I'm gonna
to, maybe we can
hold on.
sidebar.
Yeah, I don't want to. All right, let's go on a sidebar.
Okay, just a few more questions. Mr. Cowden, is it possible that if there was a wound to the chest, that doing compressions on that could cause other damage?
I suppose it's possible, but ultimately it doesn't matter. If the heart isn't beating, it's what you got to do. It's the appropriate treatment.
So would a common person who doesn't know how to do CPR maybe hesitate about pushing on a bullet wound?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
But you wouldn't.
Can you repeat the question?
You wouldn't hesitate to push on the bullet wound if the heart was stopped?
No, I wouldn't.
And you would have to assess if the heart was stopped in order to do that?
Yes, you would check a pulse like we did. We would, use our equipment like we did.
Okay. So the two wounds that you saw when you first got there, one was in the chest and one was where?
In the abdomen.
On the right side or the left side?
I would be speculating as to how the specific spot or area without actually maybe seeing documentation.
Okay. And can you tell me about I think there's a word for it, but I'm sorry, I can't remember what it was. The crunch.
When doing the chest compressions?
Correct.
I don't know if there was necessarily a certain word that I used, but you feel the sternum crack. I compare it to, like I said before, cracking your knuckles.
And how much pressure would you have to apply to get the crack?
That could vary, like depending on who you're doing CPR on.
Like on an adult male?
I mean, it could still vary depending on, the strength of the person doing CPR also. It could vary depending on the size of that adult male also. So I've never seen like any science that might say you got to deliver this much pounds of force or anything.
Right,
So,
like 400 pounds of pressure or something?
yeah, I don't know. Right.
Okay.
You're just
So
going to push
there isn't-
hard.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Can't have you talk over one another. So he's finished his answer. Go ahead and answer your next question.
So there's no determined amount of pressure, correct?
Just hard and fast. When it comes to people doing CPR, for us, we're working as a team. We have equipment that can tell us if we're pushing hard enough. For a person without that equipment, just hard and fast.
Okay, that's fair. And then they don't always get the crack, right? It's not always going to happen.
If they're doing it forcefully enough, they would.
So if they didn't do it forcefully enough, it wouldn't.
That is possible, yes.
But then when you come in, the professionals, and you apply the correct amount of force, then you would hear the crack.
Yes,
And is that possible that that happened in this case?
it is possible.
Okay, no more questions.
All right, redirect.
Does 911 have to regularly instruct people on how to perform CPR?
I don't know if I can answer that since I don't, do that since I'm not 911.
Have you regularly heard while listening to the radio 911 instructing people on how to do CPR?
We have had PTI information when we're responding to a call that will tell us that they are either performing CPR or being instructed to.
So you've seen in the past that 911 is prepared to handle individuals who may not know how to perform CPR.
Yes,
And that's to help try to keep the patient's blood moving while you're en route.
correct.
You were asked a lot about trading off and other people doing compressions. At this scene with this patient, Charles Vallow, did you ever trade off and have someone else do the CPR compressions?
No,
You were the only one doing the CPR compressions.
yes.
Were you doing CPR while another paramedic or EMT was getting the heart monitor ready?
Yes,
So this timeline of however long it took them is in conjunction with you still performing CPR.
yes.
You talked about Charles's shirt being cut. If photographs from the scene show his shirt still around his neck, would that indicate that it wasn't removed from him?
After the cutting,
Yeah, so if police, let me ask you this. When you guys are done and he's called deceased, do you put his clothing back on or modify him in any way?
no, we would just take our equipment that's necessary to take.
So if his shirt was still around his neck, then that's how it would have been left.
Correct.
You were asked about whether or not you should perform CPR on a person who has a gunshot wound. Is there any reason why a person with a gunshot wound would not need to have blood circulating through their body to bring oxygen versus some other type of injury?
No,
Is the whole point of CPR to make sure that blood is circulating to get oxygen to their brain
yes,
so that they don't go brain dead?
yes,
And you said that ultimately it wouldn't matter if you cause more injuries because if they're brain dead, who cares, right?
correct.
In your assessment, did you feel that no one had performed CPR on Charles Vallow before you arrived?
I had felt that, and I do know in my testimony to Chandler PD, I had stated that, or it's probably in my testimony that it was not efficient or something to those lines. But I felt like no, it had not.
Okay, you felt like no, it had not been done.
Correct.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
All right, I see at least one juror question. We'll go on a sidebar. Please, if you're a juror and you have any additional questions, pass down your question to the basket. All right, sir, you can step down.